Welcome to Alaka, a podcast about the relationships shaping systems, capital, and the climate transition. Today, we're happy to welcome Constanza Robles Fumarola. Constanza is a systems change investor and designer focused on transforming food systems across Africa. She's the founding partner of Inanna, an investor and venture builder applying systems thinking to regenerative agriculture and food. With a background in social impact and features design, she has worked with organizations such as the UN FAO, FCDO, and GIZ to shape strategies that bridge innovation, inclusion, and sustainability. Her work brings together modern finance and indigenous community-led knowledge to build resilient, equitable agrihealth systems. What we covered in this episode revolves around three main ideas: shifting investment logic and how it's paramount for system transformation, the gap between long-term, sometimes a bit fuzzy conceptual ideas and goals, and the very short-term essential problems and survival-based conditions and problems of farmers, or the constraints of investors. Finally, we discuss how regenerative agriculture is an obvious win for the short and long term, but how there is still a lot of education and a lot of adaptation of the financial and possibly the analysis lens through which regen agriculture is financed and considered today. Constanza, hello.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. I love every conversation with you. So I feel very, very honored to be about the incredible people you've had on the podcast. Honestly, such a joy.
Listen, I'm both surprised and I feel a sense of not gratitude, because it's a word that is very commonly used in Anglo-Saxon spheres, but I feel warmth, not gratitude, like warmth by the trust, by the care, by the attention that every single guest has shown. Every single guest has really pushed himself or herself to be as clear, as engaging as possible in their own particular fashion, obviously. Yeah, warmth, probably more than gratitude, but something like that.
I mean, if I can say, I think it's probably because of the work you've done to get to this point in all of your relationships. Like, that's how I feel anyways. I think the work that you do to build relationships and to kind of connect with people and to kind of ask questions and stay connected and be really generous, because it's not a given at all, right? Like, you spend your time in this relationship. That's what you're feeling now is what people feel when they interact with you at different moments. So it is almost the fruition of every interaction you've had. So yeah, kudos to you.
Thank you. This morning, I saw an intriguing post on LinkedIn about how to navigate complex relationships within a system. So there were, I don't know how many number of bullet points. And one of them was receive compliments positively. And I know what was said about negative feedback, like reinforce it or encourage it or support it, support negative feedback. And I was like, I'm not sure to understand. But yeah, I have a meeting right now, but let me come back to you if I saved the post. But it seemed intriguing. I don't know if it made any sense, but yeah, receiving compliments or kind words or nice words, it's a very tricky exercise when you're aware of not all the massive amount at work, but at least the part of the work that I can see and I can envisage is absolutely overwhelming, let alone what I don't see and what I can't even imagine and can't even fathom. And so, having people saying, oh, you're doing great things, feels overly indulging compared to what needs to be done, But I understand where people come from when they say it, etc. But as time goes by, I really have more and more trouble receiving it in a way that doesn't collide quite negatively with what is yet to be done. Personally, I have some difficulty to use it as a fuel, like an authentic and positive fuel. And more as I'm trying to justify myself, like, no, it's so small compared to every other thing. And, oh no, it's like a 1 millionth%. I'm so sorry. This kind of interaction. But I don't know how you feel about that. That's an odd start for this podcast, but I think it can be helpful for some people.
No, I think it's really the question of positionality, right? Of like, what is my position in the work that's happening? And how do I relate to the other people that are doing this work? Like, there's no piece of the work that you're doing And I say this not as a negative thing. I think almost I say this as like a realist. There's nothing that you will ever do that will fix every problem that's out there, right?
Sure.
And that's like, it's the combination of all these things. And it's the trust that there are people that I don't even see that are doing work that I can't even fathom, right? And that together we're sort of shifting those directions. And I think the challenge is like a marathon. It's like a multi-generational marathon that we're all doing together. So what's the thing that's going to keep you running, at whatever pace is right for you, and doing the work of the position that you're in over time to make sure that it's sustainable, right? This idea that like none of this is a sprint, and what we don't want is to burn you out, right? So I say those things because I think sometimes the scale of the problem is so big that our role feels insignificant, and that can be very self-defeating. But maybe that's not how it works for you, right? Sometimes it is about acknowledging what feels like the little things that we're all doing in our own little corners are actually received, and it is impacting the people around you. The fact that you are generous with your time and investing in relationships is giving people around you the energy to be like, oh, I'm not alone. There's people who are thinking about this. How do I lean on them more? And maybe that isn't your fuel. Maybe actually makes you feel really uncomfortable. And that's another thing that gives you energy. Going back to the feedback and the compliments thing, we don't operate in silos. And so if people verbalizing things to you, it is almost, whether good or bad, it is a way of like getting a feedback loop and like demonstrating and, connecting to, like, these are all different ways that we like feed each other. And that's not your fuel. And I guess that is okay that it isn't. But I think what is the thing that's going to keep you going without burning out too soon? Because that, like, the work that you do is really important. And I don't want you to burn out because you are not feeling this sense of progress. So what's the version of it that's going to keep you energized and going? And maybe it's not compliments, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be.
What fuels you?
I think relationships fuel me. I have no ambitions of grandeur, right? I don't have this sense of like, I'm the single individual that's going to save the world. I come from a public servant family. So I understand that this work is like complex and collective and multi-layered. So I think sometimes what fuels me is like putting things out into the world. This is what you see of it. And how does this come back? And having that sense of like collective ambition and collective future building is a big thing. It's more about how am I connecting to others and how am I connecting those dots. The joy in kind of improvising and playing with people, but like what's a sense of possibility. I get fuel also from a lot of things that have nothing to do with what I do, like going to exhibitions and talking about food and just reminding myself that I'm like a multi-layered human that is doing multiple things at the same time. Also, like, it fuels me up. What about you? I don't know. That's supposed to ask you questions.
Oh, no. Of course, it's a conversation. So you're absolutely supposed to do whatever you like. And if it wasn't clear enough, every permission is granted to do whatever.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
It's funny that you believe that you're not allowed to ask questions. That's hilarious.
It's my first podcast. I've never done one. I'm like, I know how to have a conversation, but
I don't know. There's a strong element of standing against injustice, a sense of rage. So, very strong reactive energy.
Rage is a good fuel. We don't allow it of women enough.
I know, but that's why I'm saying it out loud.
Yeah.
Watching others grow, not to their potential, because I think there are always ways to grow in different ways, and given how life treats you and what life throws at you, so you can reveal parts of your potential that can be multi-layered and multifaceted, but you can't imagine how I'm genuinely happy, and sometimes even happier for others than for me, like the good things that happen versus the good things that happen to others. Some people that I worked with, not even friends, but like people I worked with for a very long time, or that I met when they were junior professionals in my team, and watching them grow and learn and get to do things and get to build things and get to expand and get to build their lives, etc. And sometimes they don't even know that I feel, this sense of happiness for them. It's very comforting. It fuels me to keep on doing the same things for new people, like supporting them, giving them some tough love or things like that. And surprise and curiosity, it fuels me a lot.
That sounds like almost seeing other people succeed as your feedback loop. Like, it's not compliment, but it's almost like seeing the kind of investment or conversation. Investment's not the right word, but the kind
because
of
I don't necessarily take any sort of responsibility or recognition of my work through them. Not at all. But it's more, okay, we had some interactions at some point with this person. I really enjoyed what they did. I supported them in small or big manner. It doesn't matter. But I came to care for them. And after a number of years, seeing them expand and do things in their own way, that's what fuels me. I think it's a form perhaps of validation that people can grow, which is perhaps a very silly belief. Then people can change and people can evolve, you know? Anyway, back to the discussion. It's so messy. I love it. So
It's messy in the best way. The best thing you're messy.
So usually we start, but we're not starting anymore with your journey. So perhaps to be more specific, Constanza, what brought you to question the way you used to operate your previous professional life? And you will tell us in a minute what it was, and brought you to start not acting, but contributing to systems interventions, to systems awareness, and more specifically in the field that you're interested in, which is agriculture and food.
I kind of said this earlier, right? I come from a family of public serving. Most people grow up with their parents being, a variety of different jobs. I sort of grew up around adults that all had worked in governments or worked in the UN and these types of institutions. So I kind of always had a sense that there were a lot of people trying to do complex work to sort of try to make the work more equitable. I knew that this wasn't a sort of single effort. There were all these people going around it. One of the things that really marked me when I was growing up is when I was a teenager, I was living in Pakistan and there was an earthquake that was happening. It was one of the biggest earthquakes of the time. I think since then, maybe there's been one that's worse. And I remember seeing this like international momentum going in and trying to provide aid, and firefighters from all over the world and trying to come in and provide healthcare and pull people out of the rubble. And then I remember just as quickly seeing the news cycle move on and seeing the kind of unfairness and inequity of that, of who was able to sort of decide how things happen, who got help and at what timing, and then kind of things move around. And actually recently when I was back at my parents' house, I actually had a notebook as a teenager and I saved all the clippings of the news, and it was like the day one, it was like the front page. And then by like day 4, there was like nothing. And so that was the first thing that prompted me to be like, okay, this feels really unfair. As a teenager, I was like, people are still rebuilding their lives. People are still needing to get access to healthcare and all these things. What's my role to play in sort of building things that are more equitable and more resilient? And that's kind of a question that's guided me. I started working in public-private partnerships in the UN. Then I did community-led entrepreneurship. I supported governments from different kinds of lenses on how to make a transformation, and then sort of worked with technology innovators. And there's a couple of things I think that have brought me to where I am to get today, I guess. And this links back to our earlier, the first unofficial question, which is I'm really humbled by sort of the incredible amount of brilliant people that are working on different parts of the puzzle. There's a lot of human capital that is being dedicated to sort of making the world more equitable. But often there's a lot of silos happening. There's a lot of different languages and frameworks and the incentives at play. This is one of the things. It just always felt like whatever perspective you took on the problem, it always felt like you were only seeing a small part of the equation. And a lot of it was being lost in translation. I guess I'm like you, I'm multilingual. And there's this thing of like almost recognizing the way that things are lost in translation that almost just was really fascinating to me and really interesting of like, okay, well, what's the role that like languages and communication kind of come in? The other thing is I think there's, you're talking about like agri-food systems. And the reason I sort of gravitate, it's actually where I started my career. I started my career in food and agriculture. And then I sort of went down a path of energy and health and a lot of different sectors. And there's something about a meaty, complex problem that like food and agriculture sits at the intersection of all the things that I care very deeply about. It sits at the intersection of climate, of gender, of health, of energy. And the more sort of I progressed in my career, the more it felt like there's just no single project or institution or person that's going to solve anything. It's more about how do you take a lens of understanding that complexity and navigating it and kind of trying to operate at like key junctures. And I always say like my favorite place to be is between a rock and a hard place. I've never been a specialist and I'm not going to be an agriculture and food specialist. What I enjoy is being at that intersection of those things and kind of pressing those leverage points. And I guess The other thing that really, really drove Inanna, like what we're building now, is really this sense of, I don't think we realize the ways that we are solving for today's crisis is driven, is not futuristic enough, right? I think there's a lot of like, how do we fix the problem today? But like, what is the future that we're building? There was an exercise that I did once at a conference, and it was like, you could just feel that the ways in which the assumptions we're making about the present are just driving the sort of future we want. Do we want a future that's like more efficient, or do we want a future that's more equitable? You might be solving a problem today, but what does that mean for the kind of future? This is all these things that came together to decide to build Inanna. The first one was I really wanted to dig into a problem that sat at the juncture of sort of these issues and work with brilliant people who are working across these issues. One of the big things for me was thinking about, how do we shift the incentives? How do we shift the incentives so that we are connecting and investing in the future? And how do we shift the incentives so that we are using where we are within the system as a way to drive that transformation and for that to be almost the new normal? And I'm not sure that's my most coherent answer, but there's an expression and I can't think of it in English, but essentially it was a bunch of different things that happened over my career that then led me to think, okay, it is about almost embracing that complexity instead of trying to take one position, really being like, oh, if I do this, then I can do more. If I do this, I can do more. It's more about, how can I sit and embrace that complexity, think about what position I can play and shift the incentives so that we can build the future that I actually think we need.
When you say embracing all the things that I did, or all the domains or the territories of interest or of action, of expression that you had over the years and you practiced or you wanted to practice, and to not regroup them, but unite them in a way that forms something different. Would symbiosis be a word that would resonate?
Why symbiosis? How do you mean it?
As in, when you said, I got to a point when I decided that I didn't want to focus only on this thing or that thing or that thing in my past experiences, or
Yeah.
on the lens that I take or the angle that I take when I see a given problem, which is agri-food systems in X or Y geography. Okay, cool. And you said, I'm trying to look for the word, but I can't find it in English.
Yes.
I know the feeling, but would symbiosis make the cut? Obviously, imperfectly, because there's an element of coming up with a new form, an unexpected new form, a living form, which absorbs but doesn't synthesize, making thinner because you get to the core. When in symbiosis, you just absorb and to come up with something totally different. So anyway, what is the word that came to you, in what language didn't come up?
It was actually an expression, the drop of water that spills the thing. The expression is in Italian, but it's essentially the last drop that makes the whole thing sort of spill. But actually, when you were speaking, there's something that more than symbiosis, which I do think works. It's this question of like mycelium, right? These networks of almost underground. Like these experiences are sort of interwoven, but have also interconnected me to other people and other points of view. It's that interconnection of almost like, I exist right now in this way because of all those conversations, including like a conversation when I met you like 2 years ago, right? Before this was even like a blip in my brain. Like all of these things are interconnected and still shaping me and still keeping me connected to these spaces. There's that sort of like mutual nourishing of experiences and also of connections.
Okay, next question would be about the clear aspect of the work that you are building today, which is around capital. So, how do you think, or what do you observe at the moment in the geography where you active in, which is in Africa, right? South Africa. What do you observe in the realm of capital access, or capital distribution, or capital investment? And what are you trying to accomplish with what you're building with your co-founder?
I think there's a couple of assumptions. I work mostly at the intersection of innovation, right? I come at this because I think we're making progress on a lot of global issues, but I think we sort of need to innovate to kind of accelerate that transformation, right? Like I think the World Bank said it's going to take 100 years to eliminate poverty. Like that's just too long. I don't want to wait 100 years for that to happen. So innovation is almost a mechanism to do that. But I think there's an underlying assumption in innovation, and particularly in investing in innovation, which is this idea of like this unicorn, right? Where it's like you're just going to find this magical creature that's going to multiply your investment by 10x, but in impact, that it's also going to multiply the impact in marvelous, magical ways. If we're really talking about using capital as a way to drive transformation, because the space that I operate in is a very impact-driven space, the people that I talk to around capital are not the same people who are investing in like the use of AI for defense, right? They might have a part of their portfolio that does that, but most of the people that I talk to are people who are thinking about capital as a way to sort of drive transformation. We're just trying to find that one great investment that is going to make my money back and is also going to transform the thing that I care about. And the reality is, I think transformation and also returns happen when you interweave and connect a portfolio of innovations and shifts that happen across the system, right? And that's where the lens that we bring in around systemic investing is really thinking about what do you need to do to shift the system and what role does capital play? The other challenge is people still think that Africa is like very risky investing. Every time you're having a conversation about investing and transforming and using capital as a way to transform agri-food systems, you're trying to say to people like, Africa is actually not that risky. People have been investing in Africa for a very long time. What is that there's a lack of people who are willing to put their capital behind, but that's not because of actual risks. Risk investment is a risky business, but like there's a lot of myths around sort of Africa as a continent and like what is possible and what isn't possible. The other thing is that agri-food systems is seen as like a failed sector. Like, oh, we've tried it. It doesn't work. Like, this is a charitable sector. We just need to like feed people and then we need to like grow food and like this is the way that it's supposed to go.
There are lots of things that would need to be unpacked, but let me focus on one element. You said, how can we use capital to transform food systems? That's a massive assumption because food systems and the impulse to start thinking differently about the life in soils or how we think about the variety of species that are entertained on the soil, whether for cattle or for vegetables, etc., or the use of water, how it can be shared in a way that is more not only equitable for the living systems of today, but also the ones of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. How we envisage to cultivate a relationship to biodiversity that is not a serving and not only an exploitation of biodiversity, which is very common when you say, oh, ecosystem services, but really thinking that we are one element of biodiversity and how we can step into this new ethos and how do we operate and how do we navigate from that new position. Okay, so all these elements from very linear food systems and food production lines, let's say, or chains, to a food system, literal food system, and living one that works for all lives, for today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Why should capital be the driving force for this transformation? Isn't it a bit condescending? Isn't it another expression of white savior complex to believe that capital being brought down upon people who are doing all sorts of things on the ground in their own particular ways should magically, receive the light and abide by the will of what the capital holders would decide? So obviously it's a bit provocative, but I would like to hear on this.
I love the provocation. The reality is they already are, right? Capital systems are already shaping the agricultural system. They're reinforcing the status quo, the way that we're investing in sort of how do we produce food? What kind of food do we produce? Like this is all shaped by capital markets. The reality of investing in food systems in a particular way and backing companies that operate in a particular way is already the reality.
Why do you think the same tool could be used to transform and fight against itself, against its own interests?
Well, that's the thing. I don't think it is against its own interest because I do think the reality is the current view of investing in agri-food systems is undermining the real risk that agricultural food system is already collapsing, right? Capital systems are in this moment of this is how we invest and this is how food operates. There's already a new system emerging, right? There's already a new system on the ground of innovators and organizations who are planting new seeds and diversifying and farmers who are trying this. We know that a lot of the farmers that we talk to in South Africa, but also beyond, they're coming up as, yes, we care about the planet, but also like, why is my fertilizers so much more expensive than they used to be? Why don't I have enough water? Like these are real commercial needs that they have to have a viable business, and that is collapsing. Investors are still focusing on investing in the existing system, but the new system is one going to be more resilient and more viable as an investment. But also those efforts are already happening, and not investing in them is kind of hampering them and kind of actually increasing the risk for investors, right? So investors are going on the assumption this is how it's always been. First of all, it's not how it's always been. The agricultural system didn't look like this 50 years ago, right? This agriculture system that we take for granted is a new invention. It's changed, right, radically. And so we can change it again because we've done it in the past. This is one of the things that fuels me, is like the fact that we do change. Like you were saying, people grow and people evolve. The system looks a specific way now. That system is collapsing. Food companies know this. We have like the large companies recognizing, like committing to sort of transformation. But capital is not necessarily following suit, and it's not actually flowing down to the people that are doing the transformative effort. So I don't think capital needs to operate exactly the same way to invest in the new system, but it does need to recognize that investing in the current system is just not viable. It's also not long-term investment. Do you really think that the agricultural system is going to stay the same in 10 to 12 years' time? I think it's not. So how do you, as an investor, think, okay, how do I de-risk actually those investments? And how do I make sure that I have a skin in the game and money in the game for when the new system sort of is on the other side, or making sure that I'm contributing to it existing at all?
I understand what you're saying from a conceptual perspective, but more practically, do you have examples of interactions that you have, or perhaps through the work that you do, whereby you would explain or you would have a specific feedback from a capital holder or a lender, lending institution, saying, okay, we used to provide financing for farmers in this fashion, but this element, this element, this element through the conversation with you needs to be challenged. Can you provide us with a practical application of the concepts? Because it is a bit difficult to take, this very wide and broad view of everything's interconnected, systems need to change, blah, 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 blah. And also, okay, but very concretely, what do we expect the capital providers or the money providers, like it's not only capital, it's also debt or etc., or grants or guarantees, so cash providers, let's say, what would you expect them to reconsider very concretely?
I guess maybe the question back at you is, when you talk about capital providers, what is that in your mind? What's the kind of archetype of who you're thinking about when you're thinking about capital providers?
The institutions, the companies, or I don't know, the funding groups of individuals or small organizations who are involved through their cash to help more sustainable food systems grow.
Thank you for the clarification. The way that we grow food and the way that we like produce food right now is based on a core set of assumption, which is a farmer will grow one type of crop. The season looks like this, or they will grow two crops in alternation, one and one. And so they will need capital to be like, can you lend me the money so I can buy the inputs and I'll pay you back once I get the produce? So very linear.
Working capital. Yeah,
exactly. And then if I want to make investments into transforming a part of the agricultural food system, right now you have the kind of the innovation lens of the VC type investors, and then you have the kind of longer term sort of investors. And then you have philanthropy that's doing like feeding people who don't have access to food. And there's a lot of different players. And I think that's sort of what is where the system lens comes in, is how these things interact. The reality is right now, those incentives are shaped around agriculture operating how it does, which is these like agricultural cycles where you're growing a single crop and you are producing at a specific timing. We're thinking about transitioning how we grow food and thinking about the practices that come into play. What needs to shift is the time horizons, right? So for example, if we're thinking about that same farmer transitioning to growing multiple crops at the same time so they can improve soil health and produce multiple crops and diversify, that transition is going to take time. It's going to take not one single harvest, but it's going to take 3 to 4, right? At the end of it, they're going to have higher quality crops and more diversified crops. But that transition is going to take a different time than like a single harvest, right? So the working capital needs to shift in terms of how it operates. We also need to be investing in innovations that are going to make it easy for that to happen in terms of both what do we put in the soil and what do we take on the other side. From an investment point of view, for me to get the amount of food that we're growing right now, it's going to take more and more money for me to do that. So actually, how do I diversify the types of crops that are being grown, and how do I diversify the types of food products that I'm processing, and how do I structure the food, South Africa exports and imports roughly the same. It exports a bunch of food products and then it imports a bunch of lower quality food products for the actual nutrition. So if I'm an investor, how do I actually revalue food products so that they're consumed locally? And I think about reducing transportation costs and that nourishing aspect, right? There's sort of that transformation of horizons and there's a transformation of ambitions, right? Why is exporting every single food product and then importing another different kind of food product, sort of this structural norm of how I invest my capital? This is still, I know, quite conceptual because I think the food system, there's a lot of parts of it that we don't really see. And there's a lot of parts of it that are like very complex and very like global markets. But for us, what we're thinking about is how do we invest in the transformation? And for us, that looks like setting up, investing in the kind of not necessarily very sexy things that need to happen for that to be possible. The regional transportation systems, the seed nurseries for indigenous food products, the kind of food products that are going to actually make their way into people's diets. And those things look a little different than like, how can I use AI to track my pears, which is a actual investment that somebody's done, right? It's thinking about different time horizons. It's thinking about which parts of the system are you interested in doing and what kind of capital is needed for that.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. The next section of this discussion, it's about tensions. So as you know, every relationship comes with tension. And I would be particularly interested to hear about the challenges that you faced when interacting with, this bunch of very conceptual elements that drive your vision, etc., and your interactions with the daily and very short term and concrete needs and constraints of the farmers or the distributors that you may be in discussion with, or even the cash providers, as I said, who have constraints obviously of their own. How do you navigate these tensions and what do you think of them?
There's something really hard about we as humans find comfort in familiarity. This is like a real behavior thing, right? We want things to be easy. We have shortcuts in our brains. We translate things in ways. And a lot of what we're trying to do is, okay, we're talking about transforming food systems. So like, what do I mean by that? What are the principles underpinning it? What do I mean by regeneration? What do I mean about different capital structures? So all of these things are new and these things make it quite difficult for it just creates that kind of inherent tension of like, okay, now I have to understand three things to know what you're talking about. And so part of what we try to do is like, where can we lean into familiarity, right? And we do that a lot in terms of how can we try to find a way to, depending on the person we're speaking to, create in the thing that for them is a pressing issue and that is familiar to them. So if we're talking to farmers, we're focusing on like the things that they're already saying to us, which is like their commercial incentives and their commercial viability. If I'm talking to an investor, I anchor it around like familiar capital structures and de-risking. And it is the same, it's all interwoven and we see those interconnections, but the needs of information and the needs of language are different. And how can we balance people's desire for ease and familiarity with being transformative and innovative is a tango. And so finding whatever kind of way to do that is a real tension. I think it just honestly takes a lot of practice. There's a lot of conversations we've had where we walked away and we didn't figure it out.
The assumption that you're making or that I hear is that it's just a problem of communication. But people can have diverging interests, you know? They can have constraints which are impossible to align. There are some people who will have to give in or sacrifice parts of what they have or what they feel today is granted, and others will probably benefit and have more at the end of the process for, reasons of equity or reasons of justice, etc. So what do you make of that when you navigate these tensions? Because if it's just, oh, we need to communicate better, we need to understand one another, tatati, it feels like there's a neutral kind of, okay, we're all in it, we're all in the same journey, and we're all playing together in a kumbaya way, which you and I, and I guess our listeners also know that it's not the reality, really not.
Thank you for naming it. I think that's spot on, right? I think about positionality, and our role within the system is essentially to try to push a sense of possibility, like to essentially try to say, like, it is possible to do X and Y. And not everybody is going to want, not everybody is going to want for that thing to be possible. And not everybody is going to be interested in it or believe in it, right? So for us, it's about demonstrating that it is possible to transform food and agricultural systems, and it's possible to sort of make this future be a reality. A lot of people don't want that, are not interested, are not willing to take the risk, and don't want to be the first movers. And to me, the conversation is about how can I understand what are the underlying assumptions and kind of value beliefs that the person I'm talking to has. If they're aligned, like find a way to communicate that. But a majority of the time, these are not the realities of what people are operating or what they want to be, they're interested in. It is hard because people, they have their own incentives and their own structures. So I don't think it is just about communication. I think it has to do with talking to the person at the exact right moment where they are like ready to hear this. But all of the time it is just people being actually, no, this is not at all what I'm interested in. That is a challenge of it, is almost just like accepting of the no's, but also what can I learn about that from that no? If that person is not interested in this, that farmer, that investor is just like not interested, what are their incentives and what are the barriers that they face to action? And I'm not going to face them today, but at least they recognize what is the status quo that's pulling them towards that.
Okay, fair enough. Moving on to our next section, Contrarian Thoughts. So would you like to leave a statement to be commented by further guests?
We tend to think about investing as safeguarding wealth, but actually I think investing is betting on the future. All the investments we make are sort of what the future is going to look like in 10 years. So I think we need to be more intentional about how we bet.
Okay, your go-to person, because we're talking about relationships when thinking about systems and changing the system, although many guests already told us that you cannot frame it as changing the system, because that's not how systems work. But anyway, you got that point about pushing levers and hoping that something will move and observing.
A lot of dancing. It's a lot of dancing.
Observing the feedback loops and saying, oh my God, it didn't go in the right direction. Okay, let me push again, perhaps slightly to the right, slightly to the left. So yeah, you go to person.
I mean, this is definitely cheating, but my co-founder, Jess, we worked together for 4 years before we started Inanna, and I have a lot of admiration for the way that she is able to hold complexity with a lot of ease and courage. And I think she makes me more courageous and embracing that part of it and dancing with it. And I think particularly as we're kind of building this and navigating that actively, is just incredibly a core that she exists in this journey.
Okay. And now time for the flash round. So you know how it works. Big questions and short answers. Are you ready?
Ready.
A question you wish more investors would ask.
How much unpaid time am I asking for from investees? And how can I share risk, not just transfer it?
One book, music, or practice that helps you to hold the complexity.
The practice is being an optimist and not spiraling. I think the world is in a pretty grim state. And I am like an informed reader of the news, but there's like newsletters I think I sign up to show me like, okay, things are moving along. And it's not just about like a neighbor saved a cat kind of news, but also being like, oh, you know, we have a vaccine for malaria. This is like radically going to impact children's mortality rates. Like, let's also focus on that and the sort of directionality of where that's going.
A system you'd love to see more love for or more disruption in?
I mean, cheating again, but AgriFood.
No, don't cheat. Don't cheat. Don't cheat. No cheating allowed.
It's only cheating because, I mean, that's what I've talked about for the last hours, but okay. So I'm not allowed to say AgriFood systems, damn it. Okay.
You said you were an optimist or you practice optimism. What is a system you'd love to see more attention, more care for from more people or more institutions?
I'm really trying hard not to say agri-food systems, but it's just the intersection between us. And you said this earlier, actually, really beautifully, the role that we play in the system and our interconnection between nature and us has been a core part of that, right? How do we recognize that? How do we recognize our role within that?
And finally, what gives you hope in the capital/climate, or in your case, more specifically, agri-food space?
I think we are getting a lot of traction for agricultural regeneration. There's a large fund in Europe that just raised like millions of euros to invest in regenerative agriculture. We are seeing multiple insurers rethink about kind of climate risks in agriculture. So we're just seeing like that shift away from agricultural regeneration being sort of this hippie thing on the sidelines and actually being something that people are willing to put their capital behind. That's giving me energy.
Thank you, Constanza. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Alaka. If this conversation sparked something for you, share it, leave a review, and subscribe for more dialogues at the intersection of capital, systems, and transformation.